Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Tina's Arena. Today, I have on my friend Pam, and she is here to share a story with us today.
Thanks, Tina. I'm so excited to be here and to share my story. My story begins when I was teaching eighth grade math. I'm going to start the story by saying my students tried to have me fired. I had been teaching for a number of years before I started teaching at this particular job, and I always taught middle school math. And I thought, how hard could it be to teach eighth graders in a new school that I was brand new to? I had prepared all summer long to prepare for these students to come. I was hearing from my colleagues that the students they were the quote unquote worst students to ever come through the school district, and that it was my job to just get them through the year. And I thought, okay, no problem, that's easy. And on the first day of school, I stood there at my classroom door, waiting for the students to come in at the beginning of the day, and I could hear the thundering of 82 eighth grade humans coming up to the third floor where my classroom was. And I started to get this feeling of fear in me, thinking, all right, well, I had taught middle school, but I hadn't taught eighth grade yet. And I started having these doubts of, am I up for this job? As the students came into my classroom, I had a hard time making eye contact with any of the students because they were not interested in making a relationship with me. I had to remind myself these were eighth graders, so they're sort of like, they're ready for high school, even on the first day of school. As we started the school year, the school district had given me a stack of shiny red textbooks, brand new shiny red textbooks. And in these textbooks were pages and pages of problems. They're very traditional textbooks. Like you open the book and on the left-hand side of the page, there's maybe some practice exercises. And on the right-hand side of the page, there's 40 or so problems with a couple of word problems kind of sprinkled at the bottom of the page. And so I handed out the textbooks. For the first couple of weeks of school, I'm trying to teach the students out of these textbooks. And what I'm starting to realize is that the students are not interested in anything. I mean, it's like, some students don't love to go to math class, but these students really did not see themselves as math people. At the same time, I was taking a class in graduate school, and the title of the class was Intro to Math Education, which was kind of funny because at this point I already had 8 years of teaching math, only math, under my belt. And the professor would always bring these really interesting, rich problems to the classroom, things that were very creative to get students thinking about math. But they also required some sort of group work when you're doing these types of problems. And I'm sitting there in class thinking there is no way that I'm going to get these students to engage in these problems, because I could already feel that they were behind in their mathematical understanding. They were just checked out. The discipline problems were off the charts. And I was actually getting ready to resign. I had looked up the other two school districts that had given me opportunities or had offered me jobs, and I called them back and asked them if they would still have those jobs available. That didn't work out. And so I pulled my professor aside at the end of class one night, and I said, I see all these problems that you're bringing. I hear all of my peers in class saying, oh, my students did this and my students did that. So I'm hearing that these problems are actually working in classrooms in the state where I live, yet I did not believe that my students were able to do the problems. And so she asked me a question that was kind of like charted the path for the rest of my career. And the question was, if you don't believe in them, who will? So I went back home at about a 45-minute drive home that night. And this is after a full day of teaching. And I was just quiet in the car. I didn't listen to radio. There was no such thing as podcasting at that time. I just sat with my thoughts. I said, okay, what's your next move? So the next day I came to class and I collected all the textbooks. And I said, we're done with these. I started taking some of those creative tasks that my professor had given us and bringing them into the classroom. And slowly but surely, students started to kind of come around. But I started the story with my students tried to get me fired. One day I came down to the main office to get my mail at lunchtime, and I could see all of my students packed into the main office. And I came in and the principal said, oh, perfect timing. Mrs. Brett is here now. So I asked the students, well, what's going on? Thinking like, are they planning a party? No. They are planning a coup. They were ready to, they were telling the principal that I didn't know how to do the math, that I should be fired. And the reason why they said that is because I didn't ever give them the answers. I didn't tell them how to do the math. I would always ask them questions. So like if they said the answer is 3/4, I would say, why? Or how do you know? So they interpreted that teaching move as this teacher doesn't know what she's doing, because they'd never been asked to speak before. They'd never been asked before. This 8th grade, they'd always been just told, this is how you do the math, copy it down, write it, do it, spit it back. And I don't teach that way. So they were getting used to a whole new paradigm shift and a perspective shift of what it really means to do math. So long story short, slowly but surely, they started to come around. The principal supported me. The administration was amazing. They told me, to keep doing what I was doing. And they really kind of looked the other way, that I had taken the textbooks that they had just spent tens of thousands of dollars on and put them on the shelf. They turned the other way. And yeah, the rest is history. That's my story about how it changed the direction of my career.
Did your students like math after that?
That is a great question. Did they like math? I think they saw math differently. So yeah, I think some of them did like math. And I can tell you, I had one particular student who in the beginning of the school year, she was really difficult to understand. I couldn't understand how to get through to her. I'll just call her T. That was her I won't say her name. But I couldn't get her to pick up her head up off the desk. She always brought a suitcase to class. I still to this day have no idea what was in that suitcase. I asked the school nurse, does this child speak? Like maybe there's some type of issue with her language. No, there was no medical issues. There was no IEP, which we call in the United States like a individual education plan. She just really didn't want to talk to me. Well, this same student in June came back at the end of the year and she asked me to give her polynomials to simplify on the board to stay after school. Now, we had a nice air-conditioned school. The student might have been going home to a very not so nice situation at home. I don't know, but she wasn't just sitting in my classroom after school to just waste time. She was actually asking to do more math. So to answer your question, did they start to like math? I think some of them really did.
That's an incredible impact to have on kids when they're in such their formative years. I remember it is really the attitude of the teacher that has an impact on you and kind of helps determine the courses that you like, right?
Yeah. And really, like, when I look at the whole, like, to use a math word, the whole equation, it really was, as I'm sitting here talking to you now, I'm having this epiphany that it really was like divine intervention that professor, that I had taken that class. I could have taken lots of different classes. I was in my master's degree program. I had to take that class during that time, work teaching those students. And that was divine intervention. The other divine intervention was, that prior to this, I had been teaching in a very like upper middle class school. Everything was easy peasy, lemon squeezy. I had tenure. I was well liked. I had friends there, but I just felt like I was just cruising along and I really was up for a challenge. I was also geographically, the school was closer to my house, the new school that I was teaching at. But really the reason why I started looking for a new job instead of staying in that nice cushy situation was because I wanted to have a challenge. And so that was dropped right in my lap, whether I liked it or not.
A challenge you got.
A challenge I got. Exactly. Yeah.
I'm really curious, like based on the story that you did tell, what kind of questions were you asking the kids in order to get them to work together and change the way they started to think about math?
That is a beautiful question. Okay, the first thing that comes to mind that happened in that class was the students had a hard time understanding fractions, right? Understanding that, like, I had one student argue with me that 1/4, like 1/4, is the same thing as 0.14. Now, if we look at 1/4 as a quarter, right? 1/4 is a quarter. She didn't make the connection that 1/4 is the same thing as 25% or 25 cents, or right? We're here in the United States, like we use a base 10 system with our money. And she fought to the death with me. So I said, okay, fractions is an issue. So I brought in a clothesline and I'm looking back and I'm thinking, I could have been so much simpler. It was really just like a piece of rope, right? So a piece of rope, and I attached it across the classroom. So it was like from like the door to the window. It was like diagonal across the classroom. My classroom was kind of small, so I needed a bigger space. And then I gave each student, like, I'm going to show this. I don't know if your listeners can see, but I gave everybody like an index card. So this is a Post-it note, but right. And on the index card, I would write the number, right? And so I gave every student a different number on the index card. And then they had to place the index cards in order from smallest to greatest on a number line. Now, this is not an 8th grade level task. At least at that time, it was not. This is more like I would say like a fourth or fifth grade level task, but these students still needed that reinforcement. They needed to like understand that the difference or the size difference between a number like 1/4 and like 9/10, for example. So that was one thing I did with them, but it wasn't just the placing the numbers on the number line. It was once we had 5 or 6 numbers on the number line, then I would invite students and give permission to, if you don't agree with something on the number line, to go and move it, but you have to tell us why. And that's where the magic started, right? Because first of all, I was asking them to tell me, where do you think 1/4 goes on the number line? And then I was giving students in the class permission to disagree with that positioning. And that's where the magic happened. So that was one. Another type of task that I love, and I continue to do this, and I have done the number line task over and over and over again. In fact, there's somebody out there who like wrote a book called Clothesline Math. I'm like, oh, I should have written that book. But anyway, I didn't. So another thing that I've done over and over again with classrooms is starting with the answer. So instead of giving students like a whole page of addition or subtraction problems or multiplication or division, is saying something like the answer is 245. What could I do to get there? Or the answer is 2. What could I do to get there? And these types of problems you can make with any number. In fact, over this summer, I was with my nephew who's going to be a sophomore in high school. So he's about he's about 15 years old. And I was playing this game with my other nephew who's 8. So playing the game with my 8-year-old and my nephew who's about 15 or 16. He's like, well, can I play too? And they could both play with the same number. It's just they got the answer in different ways. So it's like a beautifully different, what we call in education, like a differentiated task.
The way I was taught math was basically like what you said, like, this is how you do it. Yeah. Now, like, apply this reasoning to over here. And when I tried to teach math to my younger brother at the time, I did the same thing, but he didn't have that same level of understanding. And it was so incredibly frustrating because I didn't know how else to explain it.
Yeah. And the beauty about teaching in the way that I teach, and today I teach teachers how to teach math. I support teachers. So I go into teachers' classrooms and I go into their prep periods, their planning periods, professional development days, and I do the math with the teachers. And I do that because I want them to feel what it feels like to develop reasoning, and it is not always comfortable. And I think what was happening with these 8th graders is over the years, you and I have talked about, like, you and I are in that coaching where we talk about emotionally uncomfortable, right? The teachers don't want to be emotionally uncomfortable. It's understandable. I don't want to be emotionally uncomfortable either. So it is way easier, plus the textbooks set it up that way, to say, here's the 4 easy steps. If you just repeat it 40 times, then you'll be a master. The problem with that is that a year later, 2 years later, sometimes even at the next chapter, the students are not retaining that because they haven't made conceptual connections in their brains. Whereas if they look at a number line and say, well, there's no way that 9/10 could come in front of 1/4, like closer to 0, because 9 is more filled up. At 9/10 is more filled up than 1/4 is. Like, kids will give you those types of answers. Like, they're visualizing it. And so once students can visualize something, they can understand it, then they hold onto it more in their brains.
You mentioned something earlier about the magic happening when the kids got to start discussing with each other or why they disagreed with the number line. Can you talk more about that? Like, what was the magic?
I think the magic is in them finding their voices. It's right, and knowing that they have something important to contribute. So it's not necessarily math magic, right? It's like a more human magic of, oh, I have something to contribute and I matter in this space. And so does that guy over there and that girl over there. And, and so it becomes more of a community of practice instead of everybody sitting in rows and just head down, getting their work done. They start to realize that other people have ideas that are valuable. I have ideas that are valuable. And I sometimes equate this magic to, or not, I connect this magic to, like, in the real world. We have to agree and disagree with people all day long. And so it really taught them the art of, art. I think it taught them how to participate almost like in a democracy, that people are going to have differences of opinions and you could both be right. One memory I have from that 8th grade group, or maybe it might have been the following year. Anyway, it doesn't matter. These 2 girls were in my class and they were twins and they were feisty. and everybody needed to stay out of their way. And they had an argument one day about their answers. And so meanwhile, the superintendent, who in the United States, like that's the boss of the whole school district, he happened to, of course, be walking down the hall at this moment when these two twins are having this knockdown, drag out fight. I mean, they weren't like physically hurting one another, but they were yelling at one another across the room. And the superintendent walked in the room, and I was sitting on like the windowsill. So I wasn't even like in the front of the class. I was just letting the argument happen. So the argument was, is the answer 3/4 or the answer 6/8? Both of those answers are equivalent. 3/4 and 6/8 are equivalent to one another. And what was beautiful about it is that they argued and argued and argued until the point where one of the other kids said, hold on, listen to what you are saying to one another. And then they just all both burst out laughing. And I was like, see, but they were getting so stuck up in their drama because they were sisters, and then one had to, they were trying to one up one another. But I think that the point in that story is that you can both be right with different, when it seems like the answers are different.
That's really cool. I remember in my math classes when I was growing up, I was always scared to speak up because if I didn't have the right answer, then there was like no point to speaking up because I was scared to be wrong.
Yeah.
So this environment that you're helping to create is incredible.
Thank you. Something that you just made me think about, the arguing. Oh, always being afraid that you are going to be wrong. So that's another thing that happened with that magic, right? Is that if thinking about the number line, if students put the 1/4 or the 9/10 or whatever in the wrong position, it wasn't the end of the world when that 1/4 needed to be moved to a different location or the 9/10 needed to be moved to another location. And so we were embracing mistakes as part of the learning process and always giving students what we call in the industry low floor, high ceiling problems to solve, meaning that everybody has an opportunity somewhere to engage with this problem, right? So the other magic that happened is like I knew which students, like you, were going to be shy at first. So I would purposefully select which students were going to, I obviously would have some volunteers, but if I didn't have volunteers, I would select who was going to go in which order. And I would purposely choose somebody like Tina to be like, Tina, what do you think? Do you think 1/4 and 9/10 are in the right spot? And I would like sometimes pick something that was like obviously wrong. And then you as Tina could say, well, I really think that 9/10 is bigger than 1/4. And then would say, okay, let's move it. Let's see. What does everybody else think? Right. And then we just kind of continue with this kind of banter back and forth to make it really safe, to be correcting mistakes, to be making mistakes. Yeah. Gave my students permission to make mistakes for sure.
These days you said you're not teaching anymore. You are supporting teachers in becoming better math teachers?
Yes. So what I do now is I'm a consultant. So I work in multiple school districts. They contract me out. I find working with elementary school teachers fascinating because the first thing I ask them is for them to tell me what their experience was learning math. And so I ask them, what's your math story? What's your story around math? And I was just looking at the data that I collected at the beginning of last year, just yesterday. And it's fascinating to me that how even just meeting me for the very first time, I do it on a Google form, but they do have to put their names down. So I can kind of connect the stories to each teacher. And I didn't do the percentages on it yet, but most of those teachers had some type of negative experience with math. And there are very few who are like, I loved math. It was my favorite subject. No. They're like, it was my least favorite subject, and I grit my teeth through the 50 minutes that I have to teach it every single day. And so the way that we remedy that, to be honest, is have the teachers doing math problems. That's it. They have to learn how to do math, how to feel. I always say sitting in the seat of the problem solver, what it feels like to sit in the seat of a problem solver. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense because then having the empathy for the kids allows you to better understand where they're at and maybe which parts that they're struggling with and break it down. I can't imagine having a math teacher that hates math. That seems like a not great spot to start with.
No, and it's difficult because a lot of these teachers, they come out of school with an elementary ed certification, and sometimes there's a specialty on top of that, like special education or something like that, or English language learners or something like that. But for the most part, they're generalists because of the way we've created the system. And in most elementary schools, at least the ones that I have worked with, every teacher has to teach everything. So if I had to do that, I've been blessed with only only needing to teach math every year. One year I did need to teach science, which was totally fine because they're so related. But I would have a very hard time teaching math and reading and writing and social studies and science. It's like five, off the top of my head, five different things that teachers need to switch gears and be able to deliver content to students. Math gets pushed to the bottom of the barrel every single time. And I don't blame the teachers for that. It's more like, in fact, one quick story is when I was student teaching, I had 2 placements. So I had a placement, because of the way my degree was, I had a 7th grade placement and a 4th grade placement. And when I met my 4th grade cooperating teacher, who was the teacher whose classroom it was that I was going into student teach, she was going through the schedule and she said, and some days we don't get to math. So at the time I was probably like, I don't know, 20, 21 years old. And I'm thinking, oh lady, we are going to get to math every day that I am here. But the fact that and that was a long time ago, you would never be able to get away with that these days because of the accountability that teachers have. However, like the fact that she was comfortable to say that to me, that was a big like impact on me, that statement. Just don't get to it. Yeah.
It's such a foundational skill.
And I think what people forget about is or don't realize it's getting back to what we were saying earlier. It's not just like learning how to add and subtract fractions or learning how to multiply fractions or graph data or whatever. Learning math trains our brains to function in a way that we need outside of the classroom in so many ways. These ideas of problem solving, spatial reasoning, proportional reasoning, like even driving in the car and being like, okay, do I have enough gas to get to the next destination or enough battery in my EV? That usually figures it out for you because the technology is so good. But we need proportional reasoning every single day, no matter what we do. And it's not like we're sitting down writing a proportion and solving it. It's just the number sense that comes along with it. Really, really important.
And would you say is logic also a math skill too?
Oh, yes, definitely. And logic, believe it or not, is something that I struggle with. So another interesting point is that, teachers see me coming and they're like, oh, here comes Dr. Brett, the math expert. And I'm like, no, there's no expert stamped on my forehead. It's more of I'm here to help see you and see what you're learning. So to answer your question, like, oh my gosh, don't give me a logic problem because those are really hard. But then I'm like, okay, so I need to do more of those because it's sitting in the seat of the problem solver and developing that kind of logical thinking. Yeah.
I struggled with logic a lot too.
Did you have like a class called logic or?
No. So when I did a lot of that was when I was trying to do the MCAT testing for a med school. And they would have like the logical reasoning section. And every time I was like, oh my gosh.
No, it's a lot to think about. And it's almost like you have to train your brain to think logically, I think sometimes. There's certain parts of math where it's like building a muscle. Yeah.
If people feel inspired by this and they want to hear more about your journey, I guess, with math and like the things that you're teaching, where can people find more about you?
Okay. Well, the first thing is I do have a podcast, and the title of the podcast is Blue Glasses Math. I'm not wearing my blue glasses right now. I have other blue glasses, but anyway. And the whole idea of the podcast is shifting our perspective on what it actually means to be a math person. Does it mean to sit and do 40 problems in 2 minutes, or does it mean to grapple and struggle through problems, make mistakes and learn from them? And so it's called Blue Glasses Math. You can find it anywhere podcasts are listened to. And in that podcast, you'll be able to hear the full story about how my students tried to get me fired and what I did with the shiny red textbooks. Yeah. And I also, in terms of social media, I really hang out most on Instagram, and LinkedIn is a close second. So I love to hear from people there. And both places I am, on Instagram, I'm at Blue Glasses Math. And on LinkedIn, I'm at my name, Pamela Brett.
And for your podcast, is it going to be valuable for people, even if they aren't math teachers?
A great question. Yes. If you are a parent who has a child who comes home with math homework, you need to listen to this podcast. 100%. Because what it does, it helps to debunk. Sorry, can I have time for like one more quickie? Okay, but getting back to my nephew that I was with at the beach, and he was 8 years old, and I said, Lucas, the answer is 7 or 14 or whatever I said. His mom sitting next to me, love her to death. She's my sister-in-law. This child did not have more than 4 seconds to think before she jumped in and said, think about it this way. What about this? Don't you remember what we did to 10? And I looked at her and I said, knock it off. Because what you are telling him in your behavior, I tried to whatever, but I kind of gave her a little bit of a beat down. I said, you are teaching your son that in order to be successful, he needs you to intervene. And so to answer your question, yes, parents need to listen to this because it helps to understand, that it's okay that your student is struggling with their homework, because that's part of the process. But if you're a teacher or a school leader, math coach definitely is a great podcast for you to listen to. I've got some amazing guests that have been on it. So yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Pam, and sharing your story.
Thanks for inviting me, Tina. I had a great time.
Hi, everyone. If you live in Windsor-Essex County area in Ontario, Canada, then you should know that I host an open mic live storytelling event the last Saturday of every month at Aloe Lounge on Erie Street in Little Italy from 5 to 7 p.m. If you don't know what open mic storytelling is, well, I encourage anyone to come up and share their story. We have different themes every month. The event celebrates connection, our humanness, our emotions, our rawness. It gives us space to really express ourselves and to have people listen, because I feel like we don't really get too much of this anymore. It is essentially a gathering of the souls and sharing a little part of ourselves with each other, whether it be a funny story, a sad story, a happy story, a romantic story, any story that is yours, you can share. And I'm loving the community that is coming from this event. So come to the event. I hope to see you there. You can purchase tickets at www.talesofthetown.ca.